Hi everyone, welcome to our second PLC presentation for AP Insight for the 2017-2018 school year. Tonight we're going to focus on using AP Insight and the Instructional Planning Report to target misunderstandings. I'm joined this evening by Andy Schrader and Kelly Orsi, who are also AP Calculus teachers. And in addition to that, they are AP Insight consultants, and so they work with other AP Calculus teachers doing presentations and consulting with them about how to use the AP Insight materials to support the calculus courses that they're already teaching. And so we'll hear from both of them throughout this presentation. They'll be talking directly from their own experience, so it's a really helpful asset to have them here guiding the conversation. My name is Tiffany Judkins. I'm the Director of AP Instructional Design for the mathematics courses at the College Board. And so that means that I work to provide support resources for AP Calculus and Statistics teachers, both in terms of sample lesson plans, instructional supports, and student materials that can be used in the classroom. So let's take a look at what this evening is going to entail. Andy's going to kick us off with a brief recap of what AP Insight is and what it does. I'm going to chat a little bit about some of the skills that we're going to be referring to that will show up on the instructional planning report. Then Andy will walk us through what it looks like to go online and download your instructional planning report if that applies to you, if you have not yet gone there to do that. And then we'll have sort of an open discussion where both Andy and Kelly are going to talk through excuse me, how using the IPR, the Instructional Planning Report, and AP Insight can work together to help target student misunderstandings. Andy's going to show us an example from his own class. And then we'll also have some time at the end for participant questions and some open discussion before I wrap things up and show you guys a couple of next steps and other resources that might be applicable. In the meantime, also notice that in the lower part of the room screen, there's a pod that includes a downloadable sample of the instructional planning report. So if you did not teach the course in 2016-2017, last year, then you wouldn't have a report to download, but you can still look at that sample that we've provided in that lower pod. And the other pod has a series of links. We'll get to the survey at the very end, but some of these resources that we'll be referring to, you can actually go to them directly, bookmark them on your browser, and then have them forever. So it'll be easy for you to navigate to those things. So let's get started where I'll just hand this off to Andy and let you talk to us about what AP Insight is.
All right, you've done AP Insight before, Nancy, and I just want to go through this briefly. If you have any questions as I go along, just either make a comment in the chat section, or if you look at the very top, there's a place where you can raise your hand. The AP Insight is an instructional resource for assessment for learning. It provides focused support on challenge areas that are fundamental to college level achievement, but yet hard to teach and hard to learn. It's very important that we understand, we keep in mind, it's a use of formative assessments to identify student misunderstandings during the instructional cycle, so they can target the resources that provide to help close the gaps before they take the major summative assessment at the end, which of course is the AP exam. It has, of course, the components, and you have used it before, so you're aware of the prepare parts, the impacted challenge areas, the teach, the assessment part, which we'll be talking a lot about, and then of course the act part, which is getting back to feedback from students and for feedback for teachers as well.
Okay, thanks, Andy. All right, so for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to be talking a little bit about these things that we call skills. there's a lot of ways that like skills can be defined, but just for the purposes of this conversation, I just wanted to clarify like what types of things we'll be referring to. So in our context, what we're discussing are like the skills, meaning the types of things that students need to be able to do across multiple topics in the course. So think of something like in the ability to interpret notational expressions. That's the kind of thing that students are going to do at multiple touch points throughout AP Calculus, right? Like basically from like day one, where we're talking about limits, all the way through to definite integrals. There's going to be lots of, or series if they're in BC. So there's going to be lots of new notation that's introduced, but the ability to both decode that notation, like read it, and then interpret meaning from it are sort of like an overarching skill that's going to apply across the content. So regardless of what topic you're teaching, that skill sort of lives on at like a higher level. And so it's like saying, you can sort of think of these types of skills as being topic agnostic. There's some overarching like umbrella thing that students have to be able to get better at and get explicit practice with. A lot of times what we do as math teachers is we sort of teach the topic and have this sort of working assumption that students are going to pick up the skills as we go. It's like, well, if I've taught, how to do the definite integral, if I've taught how to do the limit, and then I'm assuming students know how to read it and decode that notation and also like sort of interpret what's going on with it. And we know that that's just not always the case. And so what we're trying to emphasize more is how we can help students explicitly practice those skills and like the decoding part and or whatever else applies to that particular skill. I'm just using notation as an example. So the like what we're finding is that when students struggle on certain problems, especially on the AP exam, it's often not because they actually struggle with the content itself, but with the skill, some underlying skill. So I'll show you an example in a second. Here we are. All right, so I'm just going to pause for a second, let you take a look at the question. So here we have, well, the question itself and the solution is below it, but we're talking about a relatively like low-level, basic type of procedural question. It's asking for a couple things: the equation of a tangent line and an approximation. So if you take some of the pieces that are here, right, you've got a slope and a point. You can put an equation of a line together, no problem. And then we can also use that line, like input the value of x equals 3 into that equation to get an approximation for the y value. And so if we were going to say, quote, like score this type of item, if this was a question, an open-ended question, it would basically boil down to 3 points. You get a point for the like it equaling like -16, sorry, the slope being -16. You get a point for the tangent line equation, and then you get a final point for the approximation of 43. Okay, pretty like cut and dry procedural thing. The thing is that in the 2017 exam, some of you might have been familiar with what's now known as the potato problem. The part A of that question has a strong, the STEM and part A has a strong resemblance to the question that we just looked at. Okay, the question we just looked at, like most students are pretty successful at tackling, but when it came to this problem, like we're looking at actually the same slope, the same point is given, same xy point, and the same questions are being asked. It even had the same scoring guidelines. The breakdown of the points was like 1 point for the slope, 1 point for the tangent line, and 1 point for the approximation. But what we found is that students had strong opinions about this question following the exam, and they took to Twitter to vent about it for a while because they got to this question, they were like, what is going on? And it's really interesting, right? Because this question we are seeing from like all those components is that the question is procedurally exactly the same as the other one we just looked at. You would conduct the same steps and come to the same answers, actually. And what we found, though, on the points breakdown, score distribution out of a 9-point question, where this was only part A, right? Out of 9 points, almost half of the students were unable to earn any points whatsoever. So that means like even from like the very first step of like, can you find the slope? Even from that step, so many students were not able to get there, and that's really troubling, right? Because we just looked at how like the content itself is really accessible for an AP Calculus student, but when there's other things going on, apparently it's not as accessible. And so this is the kind of thing that shows us that it's not just about the content. The content is super important, but there's something else going on in most of the problems that students end up struggling with. In this case, the feedback that we got from students and teachers was that, well, like the notation looked different. Like instead of being in terms of like Y's and X's, you had H's and T's, and that really threw a lot of students off. And the thing is, like, that's a notational skill issue, right? Another problem that teachers mentioned a lot was like, man, it was a lot of context, and students just really like get overwhelmed when there's a lot going on. And so what we're basically looking is like staring at a word problem, right? There's a lot going on here. So it's like students have to like get better at sifting through that information, like extracting what's important and reading the sentences to see like what it's telling them. And that's a whole other skill, right, in a math class. And so what we're trying to do is look for ways to maximize those opportunities for students to practice those skills. And we think looking at the IPR and combining it with AP Insight resources can be really helpful for that. So real quickly before Andy shows you his example, I just wanted to let you know what some of the performance looked like on some of those skills globally for students who took the AP Calculus exam in 2017. Just a reminder, IPR is what we're using to stand for the Instructional Planning Report. We'll show you in a minute that it's available on AP Central, and you can download it there for free. They are subject-specific score reports for your past year's students. And it compares the performance of that group of students, broken down by sections, against the global population of test takers. So it allows you to see how your students did sort of in light of the global performance. So like if everyone kind of crashed and burned on one question and your students did too, then you sort of have some perspective on like it wasn't just my kids, or like, I'm not really sure where to go from here. But there is a lot of insight that can be gained from those. Let's just take a look at a couple of examples just for some of the skills that I was referring to before. I mentioned notation, but these are 3 other skills that some of the questions were tied to in the multiple choice section. And so we can see here, let's look at the last one here. We were just talking about the potato problem and being able to sort of extract information from a contextual problem. And so here we can see the blue bar represents that there were 10 multiple choice questions on the 2017 exam that required students to apply that skill. There was something like some kind of context there that they had to like sift through, but the global average number of questions of those 10 that students got correct was only 5. So they were like 50% like hit or miss on those questions, and that's really disconcerting, right? Because we want students to be better at that, and that's a place where we can help them like scaffold and support those skills. So those will be shown broken down on your own individual IPR. And so Andy's going to show you some other examples of things that you can extract from your own instructional planning report, starting with where to go to download it. Take it away, Andy.
Okay. The instructional planning report is I found I got dug into it really deep this year, so I made sure I got that one up and printed it out and worked with another teacher and kind of looked and shared and collaborated on what our scores looked like, and picked and choose what part we felt we were best at and compared some ideas. But it applies to you if you've taught the 2016-17 year. It is a report that basically has 3 pages to it, list of your students and identifying components of the multiple choice, and then the components of your FRQ results, and more than just the results, but fine-tune looking at what areas they were weak in, or strong in. You can find those. Hello, Susan. Someone else just joined us. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy. You have your IPR. So I'll go through this relatively quickly. It's located in AP Central, and you go to the AP report and data. And when you get on that, you will see this. You pick the AP score reports. And then, of course, and here's a live download. You can see it's down at the bottom too, where it says direct link to your IPR. It's the same link that's right there for you. So it's real quick and easy to get a hold of. And now, really, I think the important part here is once you look at your IPR, what do we do with it? How can I take my IPR and actually use the AP Insight? I mean, there's so many resources in the AP Insight. It was a little overwhelming my first year through it. So this year I'm kind of penciling in just the parts that my weakest parts and where I need the most improvement. So of course, at first I looked at my results. These would be mine in particular. A particular spot I noticed is that my percentage of students who scored a 2 was higher than the global mean. Obviously, the idea is to get those kids from the 2s to the 3s, and I'm well above what I should have been in the number of 2s. So the question then becomes: is how does AP Insight help me move my students from the 2s to the 3s? So you go to the second page. Yes, this is. I'm sorry. This is the third page. Third page will have your FRQ results. And I scanned through mine. There was nothing spectacular about any of my parts. One particular part was very weak. Was the area of average number of pupils earned in this group, question number 6, was much lower than the average number of points earned by students overall. And so I wanted to focus in on the analysis of functions and functions and graphs. It's particularly pertain to the fact that there's your essential understandings of 1.2, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and 2.4. So that was very helpful for me. Now I have my essential learning pieces that I wanted to look at in AP Insight. And which, of course, that's immediately what I'll do is I'll show you here in a second how the AP Insight can help me. I do know there's a couple of building blocks, the differentiating combined algebraic functions, and there's applying the existence theorems. Those are 2 building blocks that for sure will help. So what I did is I went into the AP Insight, and when you're in there, obviously these are the assessment pieces. So I went to the assessment tab, and in the assessment tab you have filters. So I was particularly interested in the big ideas, the essential understandings that I indicated. So I filtered by clicking the button where it says big ideas, and then under there you can click certain essential understanding pieces that you wanted. So I selected mine, and those particular ones that I was weak in. And I also chose assessments, but since these were coming from FRQs, I drew my attention to the CA assessments, the challenge area assessments, and I just want to select those. So I have a good pool of assessments to look at to build some help for my kids. And this is the list I got. It was essentially 5 different challenge area assessments that I could use. Now I've used a couple of these already. What I do is I pretty much look at them, and sometimes I really like the way they're formatted, but I use the particular questions, and sometimes I add some stuff or subtract some stuff that I want to add to my formative instruction for my kids based on what they've been doing. So I've already used the reasoning and limits and continuity assessment, and I'm looking at the derivative one right now just to kind of enhance what I already have. Another area that I looked at was my multiple choice, and of course, again, I'll scan through my information. One particular area I saw was weak was 27 questions related to the MPAC3. That's the implementing algebraic and computation processes, and I noticed again the global mean was 15, mine was 13. Mine is below I certainly want to improve that. So once again, I'm going to go into the AP Insight and say, where can I find or implement algebraic and computational processes through AP Insight? Once again, when you're in it, of course, you go right to the Assessment tab. And again, I'm going to use the certain filters. Now you can see there's the MPAC filter. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to select the MPAC3. And now this time when I selected it, I got a very large pool of building block quizzes. There's so many quizzes that I could be using, and I didn't know which ones to use. So this year I have a pretty much targeted list of building block quizzes that I want my students to go through, and I want them to reflect on their responses from those building block quizzes. It's going to give me a good balance to see how well this improves my instruction from using the AP Insight. My students really enjoy it. So, and now I have a selected group of ones that I know are going to help them specifically. Right now, both Kelly and I will take any questions you have, Nancy, pertaining to.
I did not mean to raise my hand. I'm going to lower my hand. I just wanted to pop in and say that, you know, as far as the instructional planning report, I don't know if this has been mentioned, but I teach the AP Calculus BC course, and I think Andy does as well as the AB course. Is that correct, Andy?
Yes.
Yes. So I teach the AP Calculus BC course, and one of the things that as an AP Insight consultant I continuously hear is, well, you know, the topics that the BC students really struggle with are things that the AP Insight program does not cover, such as infinite series, you know, polar and parametric coordinate systems, and so on and so forth. That's why I think that this particular sort of venture that we're looking at here, looking at the IPR, is so important, because those MPACs and those skills aren't necessarily topic specific, as Tiffany was saying before. So that is exactly what I look at when I'm looking at my IPR, because you can look at those MPACs and those skills and see how you can address them across the entire content from the beginning of the year when you're still in the AB stuff, and be able to use the Insight program to kind of wean out those particular questions and those particular skills, and building block quizzes that will help the students with that. In addition to that, you know, you can also kind of see the types of questions and the types that students might be struggling with, and continue that on with the focus once you get to the BC material, even though the AP Insight program doesn't necessarily cover that BC material. So that was just something that I wanted to add in about, you know, the idea that we get frequent questions about how the Insight program doesn't necessarily cover the BC topics, but when we think about the MPACs and the skills being separate from the content itself, then the Insight program is very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, Nancy, I noticed you made a comment regarding that you didn't realize you could do the filtering. Actually, the first time I noticed the filtering was, and I realized I could do that, I saw my IPR and I went, this is too bomb, because there's just too much information in the AP Insight for me to utilize every piece of it in my classroom. It became too much. I didn't want to do that. I felt it was important to just supplement. And here I've actually got data-driven decision making on why I'm choosing what I'm choosing. The MPAC3 was clearly a problem, and my students I could see it now. It becomes more and more apparent as they go through some of these challenge area assessments that I'm using. Again, I'm not using them completely. I'm using parts of them and add some stuff that my students have had weaknesses in before. And I already get a good sense that the improvement will be there that I'm hoping, and my students are hoping for.
Yeah, that's really powerful that you can be able to sort by, not just by topic and not just by big idea, not just by essential understanding, but those MPACs and those skills. So that's good.
And something else I would add to the earlier commentary about like searching for assessments. Remember that there's several layers of, like, we keep talking about how much stuff there is in AP Insight, and it's true, like it's an abundance. And so if you say are like someone who's used the assessments and you're looking for more, or like something that might scaffold up to that point, then I encourage you to to sort of backtrack if you're looking at, say, like challenge area, if one of the searches pops up for you and it brings up like challenge area assessment on optimization, then I encourage you to sort of use that as like the anchor when you go to look at other resources that are available on AP Insight. You can just go to that challenge area on optimization and it'll show you like every building block, like all of the performance tasks, like other things that you can do even after the assessment. There are things called ACT resources afterwards, where if students are missing those things, you can help them to practice even more like fine-grained things. And so there's a whole like suite just around like each of those topics. So say if you did one of those like enduring understanding searches, it's going to bring up something that's going to hone in on those topics where those skills happen a lot. Like optimization is where there's going to be a lot of word problems. They're going to be doing a lot of analyzing context. And so not just the assessments are going to be helpful because they'll help you pinpoint some of those areas, but the performance tasks will also be helpful as sort of like guided activities that will help them like learn to extract that information that they're looking for. It'll sort of like help them break down those problems. If you're like, how do I get them to like even start learning this skill, that would be a good place to start. And then like sort of maybe build up to the assessments if you feel like that's something that you want to really have your students like drill down to a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of add in there because the potato problem that you had brought up earlier, Tiffany, was specifically about differential equations, solving differential equations and sort of working through that. And obviously we know that AP Insight doesn't cover anything with differential equations. So you'd be able to use, use the skill of, using those skills of being able to work through the notational fluency with those MPACs or the applied problems with the optimization, or Nancy said that she's right now in related rates. Those are excellent times to be able to sort of invoke some of those skills and some of those notational fluency problems. Even though the Insight program doesn't necessarily have something for differential equations specifically, there are other places to be able to assess those.
Yeah, Nancy, you wrote down it's good as a great as an anchor problem. Also, I found that sometimes when after assessment students are individual students are struggling with particular enduring understandings or essential knowledge pieces, and it's really easy for me to ask a specific student who wants to improve that particular area, and I basically just go into those filters again, look at a specific building block quiz or whatever that may assist just that student. So maybe my whole class doesn't use it. I just assign it to the whole class, but I look for a particular student to be using it and let the student come in and reflect on those kind of questions. It helps me to help them identify why they didn't do well in a particular area. So it's a diagnostic tool. It's also it's an anchor tool. It's a post-test tool. A lot of times kids will individually say, what else can I do? I don't understand why I didn't get right on the test. Well, again, this will help me help them diagnostically. Right, extra practice, and I think it's more than just extra practice. It's more of it kind of will helps me dissect where the problem is. A good example was existence theorem questions. Sometimes I wonder where they're missing the cues. And that one's really, a couple of students of mine, a matter of fact, I have a round table that 5 of us sat down with, we reviewed it, and it became, to them, was just light bulbs kept clicking. They were able to dissect the 3 different types, and we're able to understand them better through the AP Insight building block there. So, yes, very good, helpful tool.
So we might have some additional questions that come up after I show the next section where there's more resources. So why don't I go ahead and walk through those in case we need to leave some time at the end for some follow-up. Let me see what's next here. So there are some places you can go, like if you just go to the main like AP Insight page, probably if you just Googled AP Insight Calculus. This is information that's on like just the main information page without even like logging in, so that people can know what types of topics are addressed. But I find it to be just a helpful like reference sheet, basically. Like if I'm sort of scanning both my IPR and wondering like where can I align AP Insight resources to support those, this is one resource that I would direct people to. I would say like this reference sheet gives you the whole layout of the 10 challenge areas and the 40 building blocks, the more granular topics that are addressed within those 10 challenge areas. And so sometimes that's enough to just sort of help you skim it and find places where there's alignment. And then of course we know there's also like the search tools and the filtering and everything. So I just wanted to point that out also. We have, though, some really great resources that are available, hoping that some of these you guys will find helpful as well. I'm going to start off with the fact that we talked about how this is a recorded session, and each of these that we've done so far, I think we're going on about 5 now, they all get posted to the AP Insight page so that you can go back and listen to the other ones if you weren't able to participate in those. And they walk through different topics. And so if you go back to like last year's PLC recordings, it'll start basically from the beginning. You could sort of watch it as a series essentially because they build on each other. So like the first sessions are talking a lot about like what's in AP Insight and what do each of these resources do and where do I go to find them. Like it's very accessible and walks you through things. So I really encourage you to check those out. Here's some quick steps about how to get there. There's a strategies tab at the top of the screen when you go to AP Insight, and then you're going down to where it says connect to the PLC webinar series. So pretty straightforward, and then you'll see this one posted in like a day or two, so you can always go back and reference what we talked about here. Another resource that we have available that's entirely free to all all AP Calculus teachers, not just the AP Insight ones, are the teacher modules that were released last year. These include practice questions that are FRQs, modeled after the AP exam. They include videos modeling strategies in actual teachers' classrooms. They include downloadable lesson handouts and activity sheets for students, and a whole section on scoring practice where the former AP Calculus chief reader walks you through what the scoring guidelines would be for that item, that practice FRQ, if you want to give it to your students, and then grade it the way a reader would grade it. So he talks through like all the nuances of that. This is a screenshot of what the main page looks like when you go to those modules. So you can see there are 8 of them, and each of them addresses a different topic that moves through the course. So starting off with limits and then ending with things that are like applications of definite integrals. So, again, it does have an AB focus, but of course those are still relevant for the BC course as well. So what you can see at the top, though, is it says like they're skill-based modules, and so the reason I'm bringing it up here is because we've been talking about how skills are sometimes like the overarching challenge for students, and it's hard to know where to find resources to like explicitly teach to a skill deficiency, right? It's sort of easy to rely on like, well, I know how to teach the content and go through a certain activity, but what if students struggle with notation, or what if students struggle with writing a justification, like regardless of what topic you're in? Well, what we did here was we're showing you explicit strategies that you can use and what those strategies look like and how you can apply them to lots of different topics that would use that skill. Like anytime notation comes up, here's a strategy you can use to help students learn it better. And then it also then drills down and shows you like a concrete example of what it looks like in a real teacher's classroom and how he or she does that strategy for a particular topic. So here's some just some shots of like things that you get when you log in there. If you're like, how do I get to this amazing resource that you're talking about? you can first just click the link that I've embedded down in the pod at the bottom of your screen. It says AP AP Calculus teacher module, so you can just go straight there. Here's another way to get to it, though, for our users who are just going to be listening to this recording later. You can just go to the main page for whichever AP Calculus course you're teaching, AB or BC. Go to the menu at the top that says the course. And one of the updates that's listed right away on that page are the Teaching and Assessing AP Calculus modules. So it doesn't say the word modules, but that's the formal name for it, is Teaching and Assessing AP Calculus. And you just go there and log in, and you log in using your regular College Board username and password. So the same information that you use to log in to your course audit account and other College Board resources, that's what you use when you click the login hyperlink in this red box here. It's completely free, and when you can stop and start the modules at different points and come back to it if you need to. And if you are in a district or locality that requires continuing education credits, for every one of the modules that you complete, you also get a portion of a CEU credit, continuing education. So and it'll also provide a certificate for you, so you have documentation that you earn those CEUs. And the last resource I want to share with you guys is on the AP Insight platform. There is a discussion board called Share What Works. It's the online community for AP Insight Calculus teachers. So you and other teachers like you who are teaching AP Calculus but also using AP Insight. It's a place to share best practices, get involved in discussions with each other, and sometimes there are also questions posted to generate discussion and help folks connect with each other. We have a moderator, her name is Margarita Morales, and so she'll be the one posting those those conversations sometimes. Excuse me. And also, she fields the questions that are posted there. So if you're like, man, I heard there was a really great performance task for the existence theorems, like, can someone direct me on where to find that? Or if you are wondering about an adaptation for a particular activity and how it might work for your student group, it's a great place to go for just putting something out there and picking people's brains about it, hey, what do you think about this, or how have you guys used this particular thing, and to look for advice on things like challenges that you're facing, maybe with timing in your classroom or how to sequence things. It's a great place to go. It's just an online discussion board. And so here we've reached the end of the presentation, but I do want to point out a couple things, that if you have any other questions that come up about AP Insight specifically, can be about the resources or the platform, like the tech side of it, you can email apinsight@collegeboard.org. It's a dedicated team that responds to those questions. And we are going to have one final PLC, one of these webinars, for this school year in January. So it's Thursday evening, January 18th. It'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, like this one was. And if you have been a participant on this one, we encourage you to fill out the feedback survey that's embedded in the link pods below. It says feedback survey. It'll take you to a SurveyMonkey page. It's anonymous unless you'd like to include your own contact information, your name or contact info. And we'd really encourage you to especially answer the questions about not just how this session was for you, but also which of those topics that are listed or other topics would you like us to address in future PLCs? Like, what would you like to hear about in the January session? What would you like to see us walk through as examples? What kinds of experiences would you like the consultants to talk through and for you to learn more about or to have folks share? So we'd really love to hear from you guys, and we're gonna pause and be on the line for a while still if you have any questions for the chat box. But in the meantime, we'll leave the time for you to answer the survey questions. Thanks for the chat, Nancy, about the FRQs and scoring practice. I'm really hoping you guys find those things to be helpful if you haven't accessed them already. There's just an abundance of really directly helpful resources that mirror what students have to do on the actual AP exam, and that's how we designed it. We wanted to give you guys like real strategies that real teachers use with real students, and then like sample questions that can help you assess whether students are getting better at that.
Yeah, I've been able to use some of the module practice with the justifications, and again, as Andy was saying, his students have some issues with those existence theorems, and that module with the existence theorem is really, really helpful trying to get all those existence theorems for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and the modules like unpack like what we sort of call like the typical misunderstandings. It's like what the readers see every year as being like the reasons that students don't earn some of those points. And like one of those, just from that example, is that like there's a point associated with like establishing that the conditions have been met to even apply a theorem, right? So that would be but that would be a skill that happens whether you're talking about like EVT, IVT, MVT, or even like L'Hopital's rule, right? You got to establish that there's like some condition has to be the trigger, right, for even applying that definition or theorem. But students just love to jump right to doing the thing, right? Like I'm just gonna, L'Hopital all day, or I'm just gonna by MVT this is true, right? Like they're just throwing the theorem right at the problem. And so there's a process involved, right? And students are just losing that point every time they're neglecting to be explicit about, look, I checked on this, right? I checked for differentiability, or it's stated in the problem, therefore, like, I'm clear to like move forward with this procedure. Like those types of things show like the thoughtfulness of the like why the procedure works and why it's applicable. And it's part of the thinking like a mathematician that we need students to be able to demonstrate for the AP Calculus course, basically. It's a reason it's one of the points on the exam in the first place, right? Or on those types of questions. Mm-hmm. So we built the modules around those things that are like it's not just about the points. It's like I said, the points exist because it's part of the process of thinking like a mathematician, and it demonstrates that students understand why that thing is important and that they know how to do it. But it's the type of thing that will apply across multiple topics. We show it in one example, or like we show it with a sample topic of like establishing conditions for existence theorems, but then we also talk in the module about how there's other places in the course where that skill is going to apply. And the great thing about the strategy that they show is that it's a template type of idea. It's like using a graphic organizer to help students think through like the steps they would need to like be explicit about. Like, have you checked for conditions? What are those conditions and how do you know? Okay, now apply apply the theorem, right? So that's what we tried to build all of them around, was like, what are the really sticking points for the skill, right? The skill of interpreting notation or justifying a conclusion or establishing a condition of something, like, and then showing what it would look like for a particular example of a topic.
That's true. And I was just going to also say, sometimes I don't want to say that I take flack for using a lot of the resources that are provided by the College Board because they're phenomenal, but some people say, oh, well, you're just teaching calculus to the AP test. You're not really teaching the calculus. And my retort at some points is, well, I don't think it's a problem teaching to a test if it's a good and valid test of the student's understanding of the material. And so exactly what you were saying, if you have a point that is, that's for this particular concept, then that's an important thing to know in order to, like you said, transition. So
yeah, just
sort of another plug for those modules and being able to use all these resources to make it as successful as possible.
Yeah, especially because they're free. Like you don't have to do anything. You just log in. And they'll always be there too. They're this sort of like ongoing resource. So, you can sort of chip away at those this year also, and maybe just focus on like the topics that you have that are upcoming in your course, and try a couple of those and see how they work out for you. And just know that the rest of them will always be there, right? They're all online. Okay, well, if there are no additional questions, then we'll go ahead and conclude our session for this evening. Just a last reminder to please fill out the feedback survey. The link is provided below. And we hope that we'll see you at our next and final PLC for this school year in January, on January 18th. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.